community concerns. Sorry, let me just get that off my screen. Certainly acknowledge community concerns. And I wanted to share with you that as many of you know, this site was previously in District 10. And as a result of redistricting, it's now in District 2. And though this site was previously outside of my district, I can tell you that my team and I, since 2017, have been fielding questions, concerns about this particular location. So we are very familiar with it and familiar with the area. The other thing you should know is my family home is actually not too far down the street from this location. So I see it every single day, and I will see it into the future as it relates to whatever's developed there. Over the course of that time in which we fielded questions and concerns when it was part of District 10, we did field concerns about homelessness, graffiti, blight, traffic safety, and security in the area. And I've heard from you, and I appreciate your concerns, and I want to let you know, and this is an important part of my job, is to listen. And I know that you've expressed concerns about property values, homeless housing, and its proximity to schools, libraries, parks, and community centers. And I've heard that some folks are scared about people with drugs and alcohol addiction living in their neighborhood. I've also heard that folks are scared about people with, folks that have mental health issues, fearful for sex offenders and people with other types of criminal convictions being in the area. You're worried that this development will increase litter and blight. Also, I've heard that there is fear that this development will decrease property values. You are afraid as well, and again, this is just a list of things that I've heard, that this interim housing will incentivize homelessness and bring more homeless individuals to South San Jose. You feel that our neighboring cities and other districts, quite frankly, are not doing their fair share to address this crisis, and that your neighborhood is being left alone to deal with the problem. I've also heard that you're worried that this project will cause a nuisance and disrupt your quality of life. And I have seen emails, and again, I have seen emails to that effect, touching on all those things. Now, it's important to say that many of these are very legitimate concerns, and I do not blame you for feeling that way. And I think I agree with some of the concerns in that they're well placed. And I think it's again legitimate that you ask those questions, because you're going to be. Let me hit pause. It seems to me that those questions are legitimate because of the fact that you've been essentially living next to a unsanctioned encampment for over 2 years now, and so those questions seem legitimate to me. However, I hope that you take away from today is that this development will be nothing like what you've seen now. So it's going to be completely different. It's going to be a vast improvement in my mind. I'm committed to, like all those here today, to provide you with a safe, clean, and secure, stable living community that will get people off the streets, out of tents, and connect them to services and resources through a lot of the work of the partners that we're working with. We have 2 very successful interim housing solutions, bridge housing communities in District 2 already, and residents in those areas were initially very wary and reluctant to accept these in their respective areas. But thankfully, we believe that the city and their project partners, in addition to the neighborhoods in the area, it's really shown them and shown us that these projects can be successful. The other thing I would share with you is that I think it's important just to set a little bit of context. So back on October 5th, 2021, the full city council, every single council member and the mayor, unanimously approved the housing department to apply for state funds through what we call the HomeKey grant program at the state level. Applications were submitted for 5 sites, 1 at the Pacific Motor in District 3, 1 at the Arena Hotel in District 6, 1 at the Pavilion in District 3, and 1 at the Residence Inn in District, which is now District 10 off Burnell. And of course, this particular location here now in District 2. This site has been thoroughly evaluated by the council and along with experts in the housing department and other partners. And we've come to the determination that this is an appropriate location for an emergency interim housing community. Now, one of the questions that's been asked, I think it was asked last time I was on the call with you, is why this location, right? So there's a few important reasons that I just want to lay out, and I think some of our speakers are going to touch on that. And one is that this location is one of the few undeveloped sites that the city owns and has full control over. And I think I might have mentioned that when we met. It's near transit, grocery stores, medical facilities, libraries, parks, and a fire station that's literally down the street. And also it's large enough that relatively dense housing can be built without encroaching on nearby homes. And there's plenty of space to comply with setbacks and other building requirements. So that's the reason it was chosen. Now, let me just explain a little bit about the time limits and comments and questions. We were working with folks to try to figure out the best format for this. So today's meeting will allow those who wish to comment, I think I'll say 2 minutes, unless there's just too many people and we need to bring it down to 1 minute, but 2 minutes each to comment. When your time is up, well, you'll be called upon by Lori, who's going to be facilitating the meeting. So raise your hand. If you don't have the raise hand function, feel free to raise that. You unmute yourself, share your comments, ask your questions, and then if you can please mute yourself after the fact. Our panelists and I will answer questions the best we can. And if you want to provide a comment, that is fine. We're here to listen as well. Or if you have a question, obviously, we're here for that as well. I ask everyone if we can just please be civil and respectful. And again, if you're not speaking, if you can just mute yourself. The very last thing I would say before I hand it over is just that this project has, for the most part, been approved. You know, we were asked some time back during the course of some of the initial meeting I had with you, whether there was time to kill it, if you will. And I would just say that the consensus by the full city council, the past council member, and me as a voting member of the council, when this came before us, it's been approved. We haven't received the grants, I don't believe, the grant money just yet. But I would say that the opportunity now, I think, is to work with you, to listen to you, take in your comments, and really help this develop into a development that we can all be proud of, whereby we're addressing your concerns and making sure that it's successful for everyone, including you as community members and the folks that are going to live there. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, who works in the city's housing department.
Thank you, council member. So welcome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rachel Vanderveen. I'm the Deputy Director of the Housing Department with the City of San Jose. And I have a brief presentation tonight just to provide an update on the project and just kind of an overview of where we are with it, to give you an idea of where we are. So I just want to confirm, can you see my screen with the presentation? Yes? Okay, good, thanks. I just want to make sure. Okay. There we go. Okay, so what I wanted to do first of all is to share an image of the site plan, and also just let you know just some primary facts about the site. So this is a city-owned site, as the council member mentioned. This site was actually purchased by the city many years ago when it was planning a transportation. Basically, we're trying to decide where like a major intersection would go between Branham and Monterey. So this site was purchased many, many years ago, and kitty corner on the other side of Branham and Monterey is where the library is today. And the reason that's there is also because that was purchased in the same time frame as a potential transportation, like land that may be used for a larger interchange. There was a decision made many years ago that that interchange wouldn't actually be here at Branham and Monterey. So this property has basically been held by the city, but does not have a specific use. So that's kind of the history on it. The proposal for this site is to develop 200 emergency housing units on this site, and it will be serving individuals and family. Our developer is Life Moves, and services will be provided on this site also by Life Moves, our partner. And they're here with us tonight to talk to us about what that will all be like. If you take a look at this image here, you're going to see how we kind of have I don't know what this shape is, but it's kind of a unique shape. This is Branham along here. The way the traffic circulation will work is that you'll be able to turn in here and then come down around to all of this parking and then come back around and out. So that's essentially the entrance for the traffic will be down here further on Branham. There will be parking spaces all the way around, as you can see here. And then we're going to have essentially 2 rows of buildings. So there's a row of buildings here that kind of parallels the train tracks, which are kind of right beyond this parking area here. And then we have another row that parallels Branham. And then there's going to be space in the middle here that is really community serving. You're going to have dining area, support services, offices, and that kind of thing. This will be very, accessible to everyone staying at the site. This is an image of what it will look like in this kind of walkable area that I was just kind of showing you on the site plan. So essentially, these are going to be the buildings where there's services provided. And then behind here, you can kind of see where the living units will be. This is a view from Branham Lane. So you're kind of like looking at it. What's interesting about this development is that it really essentially will look like an apartment building. That's how it will appear as you drive down Branham. It will be a 3-story apartment building that lines the road here. We also wanted to just talk about the services that will be provided on the site. The target population for this site, again, is people who are experiencing homelessness. They may be single people, they may be couples, there may be some limited family configurations where you may have, just a small, like a mother and child or something like that. But the real focus is going to be adults on this site. And we are going to provide a wide range of support services, anything from case management to job training, to just working on basic skills to really be able to create a place for people to stabilize, to kind of like get their life in a stable place, and then search and then basically also begin a journey to see if they can identify more permanent housing for them in their life. So these are all the services that will be provided right on site. So next, I also wanted to touch on some of the next steps for this project. As a council member mentioned, the grant application was brought to City Council for consideration on October 5th and was supported unanimously by our City Council. This is one of 5 sites that San Jose is moving forward with. We have submitted our HomeKey application for this project. That was done in late December. We plan to return to City Council after we receive the award to actually allocate funds to this development. And then essentially construction will begin in spring 2022. This is actually the type of construction that's being used for this development is a modular construction. So what's really actually pretty interesting is that the modular units are prepared or put together, if you will, in a factory, and that work can actually be done well before the actually site work is done. So as we speak, some of these pieces are being put together already, and then what will happen is the construction will move forward pretty quickly. I don't know if you've ever watched a modular development be put together, but essentially, they just come in and stack up the modules, and it goes very quickly. And it's so it'll be really interesting to see how it all goes. You'll get a chance to see just a very innovative way to build housing these days. We have multiple buildings in San Jose that have been constructed in this manner, and it's just really kind of exciting to watch. So that concludes my project update and overview, and I'm going to turn it back now to Lori, our MC, and she can go ahead and manage our conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel. So yeah, now's the time to hear from you all, your questions and thoughts. So we're going to do a 2-minute time limit for each speaker. And so at this time, I'll ask if anyone who wants to speak to raise your virtual hand. So you can do that on Zoom by going down to the bottom menu where it says reactions, and you'll see a little bar there to raise your hand. If you're dialing in by phone only, you can raise your hand by pushing *9 on your phone, and then to mute and unmute, you would push *6. And so I will call names in the order they appear in the participant screen there. And then I'll ask you to unmute yourself. And so once you have about 10 seconds left, I'll just kind of signal on the screen to kind of wrap it up. And then I'll let you know too when you hit your time limit to finish your thought. But if needed, if people start going way past, I will reserve the right to mute you as the host. And this will make sure that there's enough time to hear from everyone that wants to speak. So I'll also ask the panelists to keep your responses as concise as possible, and just reiterate the ground rules of being civil and respectful, and to stay muted if not speaking. So with that, I see Mason Wolf has had your hand up. So why don't you start?
Thank you. So I guess I want to start a couple of years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. One of the first things that happened, and it was wonderful, was the state provided a lot of money through CalCARES, I believe, for the original Project HomeKey, before HomeKey. And for about 4 months, I want to say, that lot was empty. The street, Monterey Highway near the tracks was mostly empty. It seemed like all of the people who had been homeless up until that point were being provided with emergency shelter. And then starting in the fall of 2020, and then getting progressively worse and worse ever since, more and more homeless encampments have sprouted up, especially at that location. And I guess I wanted to find out what happened with Project HomeKey. I thought that there was still a lot of money in that budget. Did the hotel owners no longer want to allow residents there? I know a number of the HomeKey locations are converted hotels, and I was surprised that this was being actually prefabricated housing instead of taking over further hotels for these additional units. And I do have a second question. So after that, in addition to wanting to know how this came about from HomeKey originally, I see that the units that are being provided are very small for either individual or double occupancy, not really supporting families. And not so much a question as I want to make a suggestion. We have Eatonville Park, Eatonville Library, Hayes Elementary School, Carolyn Davis Intermediate School. This is a really good place for children, and I was sort of sad that this is going to cater so exclusively toward adults, when I really would like to see more children being provided for, especially since our enrollment numbers nearby are kind of low, and the school districts have already closed some of the schools for low enrollment. I actually think it would be beneficial to the community, in addition to the currently homeless youth themselves, if there was more of a focus on families, since this isn't like the location on Little Orchard where Home First has created their 250 unit development that's almost entirely industrial. This is a residential area. And I just don't understand why there was such a focus on making this just for adults. And while I realize that it's too late to prevent the project from happening, is there still time since construction hasn't started to change some of the focus? Anyway.
Thank you, Mason.
My two.
Sorry, yeah.
I'm
I'll
done.
let you go way past there, but that's okay. Thank you for kicking it off. And I know hopefully more people will raise their hands here. So is there someone from the panel that wants to address some of Mason's questions there?
I think Rachel would be good to address maybe some of the room key funding and whether there's money left over. I would just say before you start, Rachel, is that I think generally speaking, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, but the sense I get is many of these things come before us as a council that we make every effort that we sort of go above and beyond when we see families on the street, when we see families in cars, they're sort of given priority. And so it seems to me, based on what I've seen over the years, is that when those are identified, a lot of those families we lift them up and put them first in line, if you will. And that's why we see not as many families sort of on the street, although there are still some. And I'm not sure if you would agree with that sentiment, Rachel, but anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm actually going to turn over the room key question to my colleague Consuelo. She's works at the county and has had a very up close and personal opportunity to work with both room key and home key. So I think she can address that one, and then we can come back to the families question.
Thank you, Rachel. Good evening, everybody. Consuelo Hernandez, Director with the Office of Supportive Housing. At the start of the pandemic, our office was charged with hosting Project HomeKey through what we refer to as non-congregate and congregate sheltering. Since the start of the pandemic, through HomeKey, we've housed 1,300 people through this program and currently have about 85 people remaining. So what we've done is we had a rehousing strategy for each of those households. With that said, there are some that exited the program. They did not want to participate in emergency shelters or permanent housing, but of the 1,300, 297 did return into permanent housing. So we were able to permanently house them, not just in shelter, but actually in an apartment. And the reason why we stopped taking new clients into the program is because it became very hard to try to create a rehousing strategy for people while you're taking new people in. So I don't know if maybe you're following the news in Sacramento where they didn't plan, they didn't create a rehousing strategy, and now they're left with hundreds of unhoused people in hotels that may not have an exit strategy. And we didn't want to be caught in that same situation. So the Project HomeKey dollars are set to expire in April of this year. And we have identified additional funding for the 85 households that remain in our HomeKey hotels to make sure that they don't exit back into the streets.
Thank you, Consuelo. And I wanted to address some of the or the concern or the question, Mason, about the target population for this site. So I would just say that this is something that we have really thought a lot about as well. I think that across the county and in the city, it is true that housing our families is a joint priority, and we have identified an effort to house as many homeless families as possible. And so that is something that we have been working on. At the same time, we know that we need to have places for singles and couples to live. And so this is, we have identified this site as a site for our single homeless residents. In our HomeKey project overall, we have there's one of the sites that we're looking at specifically for families. So we have identified other sites for that. But I do appreciate your sentiment, Mason, in just stating that this really is a true neighborhood. The site is located in a place that's going to be serving a neighborhood. So thank you for that comment, and we will continue to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. And I will note that I did receive a direct message from a community member with questions. So if that is a way you want to submit questions or comments, you can do that as well. So I'll have David Strick go next, and then after him, I'll read the questions that I got in from Abby, and then we'll turn it to Edward Kim. So David Strick.
Thank you. I just have a couple questions. Can you talk about what type of security services you may have on site? And then also, I'm just curious about the process. How are people selected to live there? Is there an application process? Is there vetting? What's the process for selecting somebody to live at this site?
So I'll start with I'm Brian Greenberg from Life Moves. Thank you for the question, Mr. Strick. As far as staffing and oversight, there's at least 3 staff on, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. They do rounds about every 15 minutes. They walk around the perimeter. Room checks are done, a kind of a quick one on a daily basis, a more intensive one on a weekly basis. And yeah, so there's a minimum of 3 staff on, and most of the times there's more than that.
And Brian, are you also the right person to answer how people are selected to live in the
No,
property?
so the operator never chooses who comes in. I will let probably the county answer that and talk about the hotline. There is a central waiting list. Generally, the provider like Life Moves or any of the other providers doesn't choose who comes in. We're generally granted right of refusal for people who we believe would not be appropriate for the site, but we do not manage the wait list. We perform intakes and take referrals from the county.
And I can chime in to say we do have our centralized shelter hotline. It's here for you, but because it is a shelter program that the city is funding, we are working with city staff to prioritize the immediate area for maybe the first 30 to 60 days to make sure that we are addressing the concerns that you all have raised in terms of the visibility around the neighborhood. Whether they go in this shelter or in another shelter in our community, we're working very closely with Rachel and the team to figure that out.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple questions that came in from Abby via the message here. So the first one is, do you have the name and location of some other similar projects?
I think I want to also, okay, so there's a couple different ways to answer this. We have created interim housing sites throughout San Jose over the last 2 years, essentially, or a couple of years. And so, yes, we have additional sites. We have, there is one located at Rue Ferrari. There's one on Evans Lane that is very interesting. And then there's another one that I'd like to point out, which is actually in Mountain View, but has been developed and is managed by Life Move. So I don't know, Brian, if you want to just talk a little bit about the Mountain View site, because that one is actually, again, it's the same provider and developer who is going to be envisioning this site and bringing this site to fruition.
Certainly. In the Mountain View site, people that are familiar with the Costco in Mountain View, it's maybe 150 yards north of the Costco on Leghorn. It's also a modular facility. In that site, our agency purchased that building largely through philanthropic funding. It serves 80% single adults and about 20% families with minor children in separate areas. That site, again, is staffed 24/7, 365. In Mountain View, many of the people came in out of oversized vehicles. There has been a reduction, a real visible reduction in street homelessness in the vehicularly housed in that area. And it's been operating probably for almost a year, that site. We're also, just by the way, in another county, in San Mateo County, helping to develop actually a larger site than this. They'll have 240 doors and 260 beds. For those of you familiar with Kaiser Redwood City, it's due east of that. Very near downtown Redwood City. It's an expansion of a current 140 bed shelter to 260, although the current shelter will be raised to build a new one almost adjacent to the old one. So there's one that's a little smaller, one that's fairly larger than this site.
Thanks, Brian. And the next question was, how many units are projected to be built at the location? I think that might have been in Rachel's presentation. Or if Brian wants to answer
200,
that.
it's approximately 200 is the.
Okay, approximately 200. And could you provide a definition of emergency interim housing units?
I can do that. So in our world of affordable housing, we have different types of housing that we refer to just as an industry. And so emergency interim housing is housing that essentially is built using modular construction. It's built quickly, and it has been done in an effort to respond to the fact that we have been living through this pandemic and we needed to find shelter for people who have been living on the street in order to keep them safe and healthy. The reason that it's interim is because it really is a situation where people come in and they live there and then they continue to search for a permanent home. So another type of housing that we fund is permanent housing. And so permanent housing essentially means it's an affordable home where the rents are remain low so that people can afford them over the long term. But it's permanent because they have a lease agreement, they pay rent each month, and they have just the same rights and responsibilities that residents would do in any apartment building. So that's really the difference.
Thank you, Rachel. And are the units going to be targeted for Section 8 housing?
So typically Section 8 housing is a permanent, so Section 8 vouchers are managed by the Housing Authority, and typically those are used in a regular apartment structure. So it's going to be where, again, someone has a lease agreement and they're renting an apartment. We're not planning on using Section 8 for this site because we will not be having, it's not going to be acting as permanent housing where people actually have rental agreements. They will be living in the shelter for a period of time, but again, we'll be searching for a permanent home.
Great. And so the last question from Abby is there a website which will announce the presence of any sex offender residents?
Is that one, Brian, you can address, or?
So we don't choose, again, the provider doesn't choose. I mean, there are public registries of sex offenders. I'm sure some people on the Zoom are familiar with this. That's public information in California by state law. We will be working with the city and the county to help determine who comes in our shelter. I mean, in our shelters in downtown San Jose, 2 of them do accept sex offenders. They actually have as high or higher income than our other residents and employment, and their throughput in the shelter, their success in securing permanent housing is just as good or better than other residents. But I don't know if a determination has been made yet whether this shelter will be able to accept sex offenders. Certainly no predatory sex offenders.
The other thing to keep in mind is this is a housing first model where the state has some requirements under HomeKey that prohibit us from taking certain actions. So I think it's if the project is funded with HomeKey, we'll learn more then. Generally speaking, when it's shelter, you don't go through a very intensive vetting process. But if it is an interim housing project where you're connecting people to a permanent pathway to housing, they might be enrolled in another program already. Those programs do have that eligibility criteria. So it's not an easy answer in this case. But I think once we have more information about the award, then we'll be able to come back and share more information with you.
As far as the Mountain View shelter, whether it's in a residential neighborhood, there's single families homes a block and a half to the west. There's apartments on San Antonio Road. The Redwood City site, the city has a vision that because it's on the bay, for that to become a Santana Row-like development with high density housing. So while right now there's no adjacent housing, developers have bought up all the land. It used to be that miniature golf mini race car thing that you've seen from the freeway on 101. So right now it's all waiting to be developed. And it's going to be a combination of open space and high density housing. But right now it's all developers have cleared everything in Redwood City where the 240 doors will be.
Thank you, Brian. So Edward and Jason have had their hands up for a little while. So why don't we do 2 minutes for Edward Kim, if you can unmute yourself, please.
Sure. Hi, actually, my name is Helen and my husband's name is Edward, and we're residents at Eagle Rock. And I'm actually an advocate of affordable housing. So thank you for, going into the difference with interim housing. I still am trying to understand, so that's different from a homeless shelter. Like I've seen homeless shelters in, for example, San Francisco, and there are people who are waiting to get into the shelter that day, and then they're let out the next morning. Is it going to be like that? Are we going to have like crowds of homeless people waiting to get in, or is it that people are going to be connected to a particular unit, and so there's not this rush of people trying to get in? Because that would really impact the neighborhood. And I feel like this site is different from the ones you've mentioned because this is primarily residential and also institutional uses that cater to a lot of families. I myself have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I'm already feeling uncomfortable already going to the Eatonville Library, and so I have already made the choice to go to a different library because I've already felt uncomfortable with the folks who are living on the corner on Branham and Monterey. And so I've already made that choice. And I'm afraid that that would happen And I'm glad Mason brought that up because, you know, I'm afraid that more and more of that will happen and that less, and I see a ton of families using the park at Eatonville Park and, you know, seeing less and less of that. So I'm concerned about those institutions.
Those are great.
And
No, I
also,
don't wanna
I'm
interrupt.
sorry if I have more time.
Just,
You know,
just
what
a couple more
happens if there
seconds,
are
please.
issues with
Thanks.
certain individuals, like if they, it's great if they're, you know, once they get into the housing, can they stay, do they stay for however long and however they long they need? But if there are any issues, like if they're, you know, if there's any crime or anything, will they be asked to leave? You know, what would be that process? And also why, you know, as far as social services.
Here, let's let Brian answer
Too
those
far
questions real
from
quick.
Actual social services. So usually homeless housing is in the downtown because that's where the social services are. So what would be the reason for putting this site in an area where they can't access social services? And actually transit is not that great for getting to social services.
Thanks,
So,
Helen. I'm
yeah,
gonna
that's my
cut
last
you off there. Okay, thanks so much. Go ahead,
Those are
Brian.
great. So those are great questions. Let me get to a bunch of them in a real quick way. First of all, there's no walk-up admissions to any of our shelters. There will never be a line for admission. People need a voucher that comes from an external referral source to come in. So there's never going to be any queuing. The issue with the library, I hear that loud and clear. We found that once people have a place to live in their own door and window and bed and electrical outlets and desk and storage space, they don't need to hang out at the local library. We're going to have a computer room with internet access. People are going to have their own bathrooms. They will not need to spend hours in the library and will actually, although it won't be disallowed, we're going to actively talk to them about that and having a positive or neutral impact upon the community. Everyone has their own room. It's assigned to them. The average length of stay tends to be about 150 days. We tend to focus on throughput. We want to have the best curb appeal of any building on the block. We focus on that. We do walk-bys all day long to make sure there's no litter, there's no trash. We want to get accolades from the community and hear issues as they come up. Finally, social services. We try to provide one-stop shopping, seamless services on site. So we have mental health services. We train about 35 graduate students a year, MSWs from San Jose State, from Alliant, from Palo Alto University, psychology, PhD inside these students, delivering on-site services. We also will try to host 12-step meetings there as we do at other sites. So we try to have the site contained as much as possible, although of course there will be bicycles available, shuttles available, vouchers for public transportation, and some people may have cars. So I know there were a lot of questions. I don't want to go on and on. If I missed any, someone else will bring them up. I'm going to mute myself. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The only one you might not have addressed is what happens if there are issues, you know, if a resident is found to have issues that are not good for the community.
So you must be safe and respectful to live in our facilities. That is the bottom line. You must be safe and respectful of staff, the community, and other residents of the shelter. We do not tolerate any unsafe behaviors of any kind. There's no hostility, no fighting, no weapons. We do not tolerate unsafe behavior. We try to make the place as positive and upbeat and desirable as possible. We believe that people that are experiencing homelessness themselves have to step up. It's not only politicians and philanthropists and law enforcement and nonprofits, but it's the homeless folks themselves whose behavior has to have minimal expectations. So it's not going to be a dangerous place. Those are not the sites that we operate.
And if I can jump in, typically we have participation agreements. So, if one of us wants to rent an apartment or a house, we have a lease agreement. There are participation agreements that, at least from the county's perspective and monitoring contracts, that we require. And there's policies and procedures. We also have our continuum of care quality standards that providers like Life Moves are required to maintain. So we'd be happy to share, an example of what those agreements look like.
And I don't want to sound like a cult, but we do teach our clients that we're only as strong as our weakest link, and that they work to support each other. And that positive energy becomes contagious. Once people have a roof over their head, people relax and feel safer.
Well, thank you for the questions and for those responses. So we'll move on now to Jason Pitts, please. 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you for taking my questions. I've been a resident here at Eagle Rock for about 5 years now. And I'm excited to meet with you all. I was excited to hear about the project. I think it's great that we're, helping the community. But of course, I'm not excited it's in my backyard. Just going to be honest, because of all these unknowns. And I think that was something that I felt was, I didn't know a lot about the project. I didn't know a lot about homelessness and homeless people and what type of services are there. So I think having a better effort of giving information out to the community, the local community, would be nice. Like understanding resources where we can learn. I saw you put in chat, there was a link to learn stuff. So that was great, but I think that was just a comment that I had. Getting the questions, I was wondering, what is the expected lifetime of this site? How long is it going to be there? Is it going to be there for 30 years, 50 years? What's the projected occupancy? Is it meant to be 100% full all the time? And then the people that are going to be displaced that are currently there, are they people that could be taken in by this program? Like, where are they going to live? What if people still live on the train tracks, or still live across the street? Because they're not people that can be helped. I think somebody was saying from Life Moves that some people just don't want to be placed in permanent housing. So I was just wondering about that. Like, will it solve our current problem? And then the other thing that I would like to ask is, how far away will these people be coming from? Is this going to be helping our local community? Or is this going to be helping people from Sacramento or, wherever they're coming from? So I would really like to help focus to the people that are around in our community. So that's all I had. Thank you.
Can I just say, Lori, this is the council member. What I would say is, I think, Jason, you touched on some things that are very important to me because I know they're important to the community. And that is, I think that when this is developed, if you as the residents that live next to this location continue to see issues or the same Joe Schmo or Jane Doe across the street from this location, it's going to send the signal like, oh, it didn't work, right? And so, and that's not the correct signal we want to send, and that's just not correct either. But I think I'm sensitive to the fact that I want to do everything possible to give preference and do, very focused outreach. I think Consuelo mentioned that first, 60, 90 days, whatever it may be, to focus on some of the folks that are living already on the space and in the area. And I've had some initial conversations with the director of housing for the city of San Jose about just that. I've mentioned it during council meetings. I've mentioned it in some of the memos, recommendations that have come forward. And so that is very much something on my mind. I don't expect, and I'll just touch on this very quickly, but I don't expect there's going to be anyone from Sacramento moving in. I think there was some statistics sometime back that noted that I think about 80% of the folks that are homeless became homeless while living in San Jose. And I'm not sure if that's an outdated statistic, but that's been around a while. And so these are going to be folks that live, I hope the majority live in San Jose, but I also know that some of the efforts from the county are in fact county-wide, right? And so I'll let other folks chime in on that, but your points of work are well taken. And we're going to make every effort to make sure that we prioritize as much as possible some of the folks that currently reside in the area, because I think that's very important.
And you are very close, council member. Depending on the interim housing program or shelter, it averages between 76% and 92% with an affiliation to San Jose. And affiliation, the variables that we use are in which city do you spend more of your time? Which city did you become homeless? Or where did you live before you became homeless? And if you're employed, what city do you work in?
And when we ask people where they went to high school, which is kind of the acid test, whether it's our shelters in Palo Alto or Redwood City or Mountain View or San Jose, they almost always went to high school within 15 miles. It's even astounding to us.
You know, the other thing that I would say too, and this is not at all related to housing the homeless and such, but it's important to acknowledge and recognize that essentially, you know, where the train tracks are, high-speed rail is going to be coming through there in the next, you know, I don't know, 5-10 years or whatever that may be. So we are also, as a city, as a state, as a high-speed rail authority, are thinking about the future of that intersection at Branham and Monterey. And so I think there may be some changes that come to that immediate area because of that. I don't know how that affects the site, but I think that's just important to keep in the back of your head, that that whole intersection there may change, because we're actually pushing as a city to not have at-grade crossings. So that road may dip in the future, or you know, different things may happen, but so that's something to keep in mind as we think about the future of that area.
Yes, thank you. And I was trying to scribble down some of the other questions that Jason had. So I just want to see if I can touch on a couple of them. One of the first questions you also asked was, how long will this building be in place, right? So that's a great question. And the building, I mean, this type of development is built to last. So, I mean, this is going to be built to be a 30-year plus structure. And so our HomeKey funding will require that it be serving our this specific population for 15 years at a minimum. So that's kind of gives you one idea, but this architecture and new building will be a part of the neighborhood for a long time to come. And then I think there was another question. I just want to be
Projected occupancy.
So we should.
Sorry, Rachel. I just wanted to make sure you got that question. That was one I had written down. What was the projected occupancy?
We shoot for over 90%. Sometimes it takes a couple days to turn a unit over. And as people get housed, we just want to make sure that the unit is almost staged for the next individual or couple. So we shoot for over 90% occupancy.
Yes, thank you. And then the other one I had, I just wanted to kind of address or also contribute to the answer. Can the people who are living there now be housed? I think that's a really interesting question. And as you know, as we start construction, you know, clearly there will be a point in time when the people who, you know, are calling this site home right now will have to be, in order to do that safely, they will have to move off the site. So we're going to be working closely with Life Moves. We have an outreach team who's going to be working with this group very closely to just to find, hopefully find some housing solutions for them. The other thing I wanted to just say is that what we want to do with this site is also to make this be a place that can, for homeless who are seeking housing, who are living, excuse me, in the area, that this be a housing solution for them. And so that's how we just, we have a priority for local homeless to be housed at this site. So in the future, this will definitely be an option for them. So, anyway, so that is something that we have implemented across the city, because, you know, obviously there's some reason and some connections that our residents have to this area. And so we would like to keep them as close to family or jobs or whatever it is that they feel connected to in this area. We want to maintain that as we find housing solutions for them as well.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, it just seems like those people there have really gotten comfortable. They've like dug in and made like large rooms and put like tarps over it. Yeah. Anyways, I feel like they have a roof over their heads now because they've really gotten comfortable. But yeah, thanks.
Thank you for the questions, Jason. And so I did get a direct message from Ursula, and there's two questions in there. And the first one, I believe, Brian, you addressed, but just want to double check. What is the average time that people might live in the place?
So prior to the pandemic, it was 90 to 120 days. Our average length of stay has gone up to about 150, 170 length of stay, 150 to 170 days. But as long as people are progressing towards their housing goals, they're meeting with their case manager, they're engaging in the services that they need to engage in, they're saving money. We don't exit people who are working towards their housing goals. So a room, a door is a valuable spot. We do set a relatively high bar for our client population. Obviously, it's not the same bar for everyone. It's uniquely tailored for each individual. Every individual comes in, gets a case plan. This is how the case plan delineates how we work with you to secure permanent housing. But the average length of stay about 6 months or so, or less.
Thank you, Brian. And then the other part of her question, which is that very similar to Leah's in the chat. So it seems that other sites are not in a residential area. Why was this one selected in a residential area? And why, similarly, why this spot and not others that aren't in the middle of a neighborhood?
I can jump in and just say, you know, we have been finding sites for housing all over the city, and it's important to us to create homes in residential areas. That's, you know, that's really how our general plan works for the city. That's how we want to guide development. And it's, you know, places where people live is a great place to build homes. So I think that's one way to look at it. And also there are, yeah, I mean, I would just clearly say that it is very common and normal and consistent for us to cite these locations in neighborhoods.
Thank you, Rachel. So I'm going to, because I don't see any new hands up, I'll read a question from the chat. I don't think this was addressed, but forgive me if it was. I'm trying to keep track of multiple things here. But the question from Belinda is, how will this unit be any different from those that have been developed? I'm not sure if those are part of Life Moves, but Markham Plaza and Kirtner Studios.
So Markham Plaza and Kirtner Studios are both permanent housing that the city and county have supported over the years in different ways. And so some of the, I would just say some of the difference on this site is really that we're going to be really focusing on having intense services on site. That's something that we have invested in more recently for those two sites that you just mentioned. Over the years, we had limited services on site at those locations, but we've actually really focused on increasing that to provide services to the people who are living there. So I think that from the beginning, the intention of the services and support for the residents at this site will be fully integrated. And yeah, and so we hope that it will be a really strong community.
And Life Moves does not operate those sites. Just an FYI.
Okay, so I'll just point to another comment in the chat from C. Phelps, who's lived in the Eagle Rock area since 1984. Is noted about the community park used to be a safe place to go, but with the homeless camp coming in, there's been a lot of trash and it doesn't feel safe there anymore. So to paraphrase, is in the chat, the full comment. But do you envision this development adding any enhancements to the overall security of this problematic area?
I think I would just say, and I'm sure Brian can touch on this, but there's going to be activities going on within the property. So I suspect some of those folks may, decide to stay within the property, use the computer lab or the community space. But I think obviously the litter and blight and other things that go on at different parks around the city are of concern for us. And that's my role as your council member to help address that. So if you can certainly reach out to my office, but I think it's also important to just say, and I think it's intuitive and people probably understand this, but I'm just going to say it, is that the folks that live there, even the folks that are currently there now in the tents, right? They're citizens of the city of San Jose. And so they're going to be going to the parks just like any other individual, and have every right to do so. But obviously, whether you're homeless or housed, it doesn't matter in my eyes. If you're doing something inappropriate, I think, you're the eyes and ears for us, me as a council office, to help alleviate some of those concerns and working with the police department if necessary. And so I would say chime in and let us know what issues are going on. But I do expect, as I mentioned, and again, Brian can add to this, that I think some of the folks are naturally going to want to do things inside the complex, if you will.
Well, I mean, just to level set the conversation, I mean, there's going to be 200 people that have their own toilet. There's going to have 200 people that are going to have their own trash can. There's going to be 200 people that are going to be fed 3 square meals a day and access to snacks all day long. So it's going to alleviate a significant stress on the immediately adjacent neighborhood. Is it going to solve everything? Probably not, but it's going to have a positive impact.
Thank you for those responses. And so I'll now turn it to Stan P to have a couple minutes to speak, and then we'll turn back to the comments in the chat.
Hi there. So one of the things that I'm consistently hearing is we're all for the homelessness, right? We want to collectively address this issue. But what I'm hearing collectively is the location. And location becomes extremely important because of all the comments that were made: transportation, homeowners, families, children, right? Now, early on, someone mentioned, hey, we hear your feedback, right? And that's important. Yet decisions historically and even currently are made opposite from our desires. Now, action is quintessential to listening, right? As we know. My question here is, how can we trust and ensure that you are looking out for the best interests of our district and also the families that live here from this day forward?
That's a very important question. Some of the decisions that we make as the council, as a mayor, as we mentioned at the beginning, this was a unanimous decision. And although it may be viewed by individual communities as maybe a challenge or, concerns, which I think we have an obligation to alleviate, to solve, to move forward, to make better. There are many decisions we make at a city level that we, when I say we, I mean the council members that are elected throughout the city, the mayor that's elected by everyone in the city of San Jose, that we think, based on all the information, based on listening to the experts, that we think are the best decision for our city. Now, I agree with you, I guess, to a certain extent, that something that's very quintessential to listening is action. One of the things we've listened to time and again is that we in the city of San Jose have an issue with having too many folks on the street. And the action, and us listening to that, the action that we're taking is developing projects like this that help alleviate the issue. The other thing that I've often told folks when I'm out in the community, especially when we're meeting in person, is that, there is a difference between listening and doing exactly what you want. We strive to incorporate all the, suggestions, concerns into everything that we do. It's impossible to satisfy every single member of the community. And so we do the best that we can. And that's why we're having this meeting, to listen, to take in input. Knowing that we feel as a city council, as the representatives of the city, that we think this is the best course forward, all the while, making sure that we maintain and are committed to that, very deep and sincere obligation to keep folks safe and in a secure, clean, city. And this is just part of that process. And I understand that some folks may not be supportive of this, but you have my commitment. I mean, I'm in office. I'm in office for another 3 years. I'm not going anywhere. My expectation is that I'm going to see the success of this project through. And it's going to be, by the time I leave office, it's going to be a long-standing project already sort of embedded within the community. My expectation is that any kinks that need to be worked out are going to be worked out before I leave office. I think if you speak to anyone in the respective communities that are in and around the existing sort of what we call bridge housing locations on Burnell and Monterey or Rue Ferrari, neighbors will tell you that my office has been engaged, right? And one of the things that we plan to do, and I was going to mention a little later, but our goal is to create, lift up, and maintain a citizen or advisory committee of sorts, in which you can continue to have input, suggestions, thoughts, recommendations on what's going on in that property, right? And work with us, with the operator, to make it a success. Because I assume that everyone wants this to succeed, right? No one wants to see this fail. It doesn't bode well for, if it does in fact fail, it just shows that this isn't a good thing to do, right? We don't want that to be the case. And so I'm with you to work with you to help solve some of these issues that really impact our community and our city. And I think this is moving this forward is one of those things that we can do to move one of these big, challenging issues incrementally forward and move it in a good direction.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up, so you just touched upon many aspects where you had mentioned you want to work with us. How will you work with us, and what will you work with us on? That's the first part. And then secondly, it sounds as though we're hoping for the best, because I hear a lot of positives. Hey, security, that would be taken care of. We would monitor the people that would be living there. But what are we doing to prepare for the worst?
Yeah, what I would say is, everyone you see on this call, from Consuelo, from the county, from Brian, from Life Moves, from Rachel with the city, everyone on this call, these are all professionals. These are all folks that do this day in, day out. And so I have every confidence that if Brian, for example, says that X is going to happen, that he and his organization as an operator we're going to hold them accountable to that.
And it will be responsive.
Correct. And that's very important, both to the community and my office, right? And the city. Because we're essentially hiring them to do this work, right? Important work that they're very good at. Now, how am I, as a council member, going to be responsive or work with you is, I think if, I've been accused of a lot of things during my time in office, but one thing I haven't been accused of is not being present or accessible. I commit to you, to every member of this community, because I live in the community, more importantly, or one of the reasons, and I'm real representative. So I commit to have an open line of communication, to field questions. I am one of the few offices on the 18th floor where all the council members are that have had the same staff with him since I took office. You have a great group of professional folks in my office that are responsive, that are attentive, that are smart, that are hardworking, that are going to be here to lead us through this, to help lead us through this new endeavor. And I commit to making myself available anytime the HOA or any other organization or group or entity or neighborhood association in my district it wants to talk and discuss things, always. And so I've been known to give out my cell phone number, and my staff sometimes tells me I shouldn't be doing that, but I will even recite my cell phone number. And Stan, we can sit down and have coffee and have conversations. I see that as one of the main components of my job. So for all you that are listening, I'll put my phone number in the chat, my cell phone number. It's 408-650-9053. I'll put it in the chat, and that is my commitment. That's all I can offer, apart from offering the expertise of all these experts that we have on the panel that are going to be working to make this a success.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Last final comment. I do want to thank you. Appreciate you making the commitment. I just would have hoped that commitment was placed prior to this decision being made, that all this information was shared prior to moving forward and getting this site developed.
And I'll just end with this comment. I appreciate that, Stan. Prior to actually almost maybe just earlier this week or last week, I wasn't the council member for this area. And so my assumption was that the council member for your area, which was at that time District 10, was handling some of that. And so I commit.
You've been in your district all along. It's just the development wasn't in your district.
Well, true. But what often takes place as it relates to some of these developments, if it's in X district, then typically no other council member is involved in that space. It's typically the purview of that particular council member. And so, maybe that isn't the best model, but, I try to have a hands-off approach, if you will. But now you all are in my district, District 2. And so we are going to have a very hands-on approach to making this a success.
Thank you, Councilmember. So I just want to reiterate from the chat, since you mentioned the advisory committee that is being set up, that Helen did say, please email me directly if you're interested in being on that committee. And she provides her email there as helen.chapman@sanjoseca.gov. So I'm just reading that out loud for anyone on the phone that might not have easy access to the chat there. But we are coming down to 7 o'clock. So I'm going to read the questions from Nick in the chat, since he hasn't gotten to speak or ask other questions yet. And I'll just ask the other panelists if you can try to answer some of the unanswered questions in the chat. That way we can save the chat and have that as part of the meeting notes here. And that there'll be, as the council office shares out information and the city shares out information, we'll be taking all these notes and incorporating that into that. So with Nick, his questions was, how was Life Moves chosen? Were there open bids, or is it due to its nonprofit nature? So I'll stop there and see if anyone wants to take that.
Yeah, Rachel? I can jump in quickly on that one. So when we started our process to determine how we wanted to move forward with the HomeKey grant program this year, the city issued a request for interest, basically. And we looked out and asked for any nonprofits, any developers, any hotel owners, anyone who wanted to participate in the HomeKey program in this coming year to respond. Life Moves stepped forward and let us know that they were interested. And so we selected them through that process.
And if I can just say that Life Moves had previously done some great work in our district at the District 2, at the Southside Community Center, where they were managing the safe parking location there. And I think the overnight warming location at some point. They did an excellent job. And so I have every confidence that they're going to continue the good work in this space.
Thank you. And so two financial questions. One is, what is the budget for development, and will the funds be dispersed like traditional bank financing as construction milestones are achieved?
I'm trying to think if I have all those numbers on the top of my head. Essentially, the development will be funded in two ways: through HomeKey funds, and then also through a philanthropy donation made by the Sobrato Foundation. And so those two sources will be funding. If there is any other gaps, the City of San Jose plans to support this project financially as well. And I don't know if I could ask Joanne if she could just pop on and let us know what the cost. I just don't have it memorized. I don't want to get it wrong.
Hi, good evening, everyone. The capital cost of the project is around 40 million, which is covered entirely by the HomeKey funds, and with the $5 million donation that Rachel just mentioned on the Sobrato Foundation.
All right, and then how's the money dispersed? This will be done as construction draws are made. That's typically how our programs work. So as the grant is awarded, the grant money will be, I'm pretty sure the grant funds will go to the City of San Jose, and then the City of San Jose will work with Life Moves as construction draws are like expended. Then invoices are sent to the city reviews that, approves it, and then provides a disbursement.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have time for one more commenter. I see a hand raised by a 408-209-2076 phone number. And so after that commenter, I'll turn it back to the panelists for any closing remarks. And if you want to address any questions that are in the chat that were unanswered, since we're coming up here on 7. So the 408 number, go ahead.
I'm just curious, in regards to our taxes, is there a breakdown of any of our taxes being utilized for this project and the 30 years going forward? And what's the breakdown? How much per taxpayer?
This is Rachel Vanderveen again. I'm just trying to think of how to answer that. So the HomeKey funds are funded through, essentially this is through American Rescue Act funds made available through the federal government. And I don't have good information on exactly where the money came from the federal government. Obviously the $5 million from the Sobrato Foundation is all donated. That is not collected from any sort of a tax source. And then the operating costs going forward will be something that is paid for in contributions by the city and by Life Moves. So it'll be, again, a combined contribution of donations, and then also most likely Measure E funds from the City of San Jose. And Measure E funds are raised from transfer taxes in the City of San Jose on properties that are $2 million or more. So properties that are sold to another individual that are valued at 2 million or more are charged a transfer tax. And then those funds would also be looked to support the operations of the facility in the future.
Thanks.
Thank you. So any closing remarks by the council member or?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, you know, my office and I personally intend to have an open line of communication with the community as this moves forward through development and obviously after development. And as Helen mentioned, we do plan to stand up a citizens advisory committee, and we've done that in the bridge housing locations down on Monterey and Brunel and Rue Ferrari. So it's something familiar with us. And we look forward to working with you all, and please know that you can reach out to us. And I would also say that, and I'm not sure if it's still available, but I think some of the partners on the call, maybe you specifically, Brian, has shared that you were willing to maybe give tours of existing properties just so folks can take a look. Was that offered at some point, Rachel or Brian?
Sure, we can do that and be certain, you know, we're committed to making certain that this facility and site will be an asset to the community. You know, we do not operate programs that are blights on the community. This is going to be an asset, and there's going to be issues, and we'll work to correct them. But it's going to be an asset.
So I would say if anyone's interested in getting more information about some of the existing properties where similar type of projects are taking place, reach out to my office. It's District 2 at sanjoseca.gov, and we can help coordinate something. But with that, that's all I have. I thank everyone for being here. And Lori, I'm not sure if there's anything else or anyone else has comments.
Thank you, everyone, for being here and for your time. We know evenings can be tough. My kids have made a grand entrance. My husband's done his best to keep them at bay, but I think it's probably a good time to close out. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.